post that for anybody who's absent. All right, so it says here, what is a causal argument? It argues a cause and effect relationship that exists in a particular social phenomenon related to your identity. This may be related directly or indirectly. So don't worry, you're never going to have to justify, well, this is related to my identity because I deal with this. You know, if you're interested in college athletes being paid, it could just be that you're really into sports, right? So that's what we've been doing this semester, is kind of exploring our interests, our issues, the things that we want to know more about that can help us understand ourselves better. That's all you need to do, and you won't have to justify that. Okay, so I give some examples. For instance, you may be interested in poverty rates in Mississippi if you're from Mississippi, or even out of state and you just want to know Mississippi better. You might be interested in looking at the effects of the current Me Too movement on the ways in which advertisers treat stereotypes surrounding gender roles. There are just all kinds of things, okay? You just want to make sure that you're looking at causes or effects. Okay, when you start writing your paper, it will probably take one of these three forms. You are identifying a cause and then arguing its effects, okay? So an example would be, consider the controversy of the 2019 Gillette, The Best Men Can Be commercial. What are the potential effects to the fallout of this advertisement when it comes to men and women's understanding of gender roles, okay? So that we're looking at the cause. The issue is the commercial. Okay, what are the effects? What's the fallout kind of in pop culture? Oh, we're seeing that right now with like the, oh gosh, the guy with the cowboy song that now he's released this, Lil Nas. Yes, there's all this controversy because he's released the video about hell. I don't know if y'all been following that. And now, oh man, Twitter's kind of blowing up over it, and it is interesting. So you can always look at something like that, like this pop culture event, and then what are the potential effects? What is the fallout going to look like for that? Who benefits, who doesn't, that sort of thing. All right, the second thing is identify the effects and argue their cause. So there may be the effects would be the problem, right? So 2019, this is before the pandemic, the US life expectancy went down for the first time in decades. So a lot of that has to do with what they call deaths of despair, which many of them are suicides or drug overdoses. So I might be interested in that and say what societal or cultural factors could be causing this. So I want to explore, you know, why is the life expectancy going down in the US? All right. Then lastly, you might have both. So you're actually identifying a chain of causes and effects. So for instance, Mississippi has the highest maternity mortality rate in the country. What is causing the phenomenon? Okay, so your paper may explore what's causing it. And it says here, the rate is high for white mothers in the state, but even higher for Black and brown women. What is causing that? And what are the potential effects of this? Okay, so this paper explores both, kind of looking at causes and effects of the problem. Okay, and you can do any of those three with this paper. All right, here is a little pep talk basically on why research is so important to this argument and why we started with a research journey project as opposed to just starting this paper without focusing so much on our sources. One thing that might help you as you're developing your paper though, especially if you feel like your sources kind of all say the same thing, or you're feeling like you're becoming redundant as you're starting to draft your argument, you might consider what events or behaviors led to the phenomenon, what social or economic conditions or cultural attitudes led to the issue, whom does the issue affect and how does it affect them, and how might the issue affect people indirectly. And not even people, but maybe groups. So if we go back to that mental health in college students, you know, how might offering more mental health services, you know, indirectly affect the university, for instance, you know, maybe the financial impacts or something. Okay, and then this last one's especially important as you craft the end of your paper. Consider what, that should be types, not times, what types of interventions or solutions could help in alleviating issues surrounding the phenomenon. Okay, and a lot of that will come from your research. Often at the end of articles, it kind of pushes into solutions or interventions or something like that. All right. Let's see. Yeah, this is kind of important too, especially because with causal arguments, we tend to want to, I want to know the exact cause, or I want to argue the exact effects, right? Sometimes it's not a cause that you're looking at, but more of a correlation or association. So be okay with that. Also be okay with it that your sources will sometimes state there is no particular cause, or we can't argue that this is the cause, but there is evidence for association. Also know that many social problems are not caused by one thing, right? They tend to be intersectional. So if you ever want to put that into your argument, you're welcome to. There is a sample argument. It's really dated though. So if we click into this, it's about, oh, it's over here. Okay. I need to fix that link. When you come in here, if you go under argumentative purposes, you see causal argument and sample. This is from Alex Elsier. Now, I don't know, they may have updated it by now. No, they haven't. This is a strong causal argument. It looks at September or 9/11 commemorations and why some of them in media can be exploitative and also maybe promote misinformation about what actually happened on 9/11. Things like movies, the 9/11 movie that came out, that might not tell like the full story. So this is a great one to read too, because they annotate this sample. So when you go through, you can actually see some little helpful tips. You can also see where this essay kind of goes awry and doesn't do as well to provide evidence. I think it's toward the end here. Yeah, here it says, there's not enough to evidence to really support one of the claims. So even though this is a strong essay, it also shows you kind of how you can go wrong, or at least how to make sure that you have appropriate evidence to support some of the things that you're saying. This is also in MLA format. So you can also look at that for some MLA specifications, including things like putting in block quotes, which are these really long quotes, how you format those. So y'all don't forget that on the assignment sheet that that sample argument is in there. All right, let's talk process. The first part you've already finished or almost finished. It's the research journey assignment. So that's where you're pulling in all your sources, figuring out their connections, and figuring out exactly what it is you want to say, okay? Next, you're going to craft a clear, well-researched, and convincing causal argument that provides ample support and evidence for well-crafted claims that explore cause and effect relationships of a particular social phenomenon, okay? Remember, argumentation requires critical thinking and understanding and refutation of potential counterclaims. Again, counterclaims may not function like you would think a position paper counterclaim would. It may just be more of, oh, well, how does this affect this group indirectly, and how might I respond to that? Basically, you just want to read your paper from kind of the devil's advocate side. What would someone who disagrees with you say to you about your paper and where it's going, and how might you counter that with evidence? Okay. The writing process is going to be really important for this piece, so we're going to kind of break it up. I want you guys to draft an introduction to your paper by Monday. Okay, so we're actually going to do a few rounds of peer review. We're definitely going to peer review on Monday with your introduction, okay? Just make sure your introduction also has your thesis statement at the end. Then we will probably, I haven't built out next week's calendar, but we'll probably do another peer review, you'll kind of do it on your own, of an introduction plus at least a few body paragraphs. And then the following week, the week after next, we'll probably have our official peer review. Now, of the whole document with works cited page and everything. So just keep that in mind. We're going to be drafting this paper within the next 2 weeks. And within those 2 weeks, you can also set up a conference with me. You just tell me kind of what day, what time, etc. Okay. Your audience will be your academic peers. Remember, they may or may not agree with you on this argument, but after they've read it, they should be able to conclude that your work is well supported and fair, even if they don't agree. Okay, so that's the goal. That's what you're trying to get to. All right, this is the stuff people want to know, how many pages and all that stuff. So we're going to continue in MLA format, so you want to make sure that all those specifications are met. This requires at least 5 sources. The sources should be relevant and reputable. Now notice I have relevant in there too. So say you have a popular source like a Twitter thread or comments from a Facebook post or whatever. That may be very relevant to what you're trying to argue, okay? But your sources should also be reputable. So just make sure you're probably working a lot of that out in your tutori, figuring out whether or not sources are reputable, but when in doubt, double check, make sure you know who wrote it, who published it, why we should trust them, all that stuff. You'll have your works cited page. Because you're using 5 sources, the in-text citations become extremely important. That way we know what source you pulled which information from, okay? There is a link to Al Purdue where you can look at MLA formatting. The paper should be a minimum of 5 pages in length, but that includes your works cited page. So it really is a 4-page paper, okay? But it needs to be that nice full 4 pages, not like 3.5 with the works cited page. Ultimately, though, you can go as long as you need to. I mean, it just as long as it's fully finished and thought out. And then it should have a meaningful title, okay? I will go through the scoring considerations for this one because I think it's important to do it before you guys start writing, because a lot of it ties back to that argumentation versus persuasion, okay? You'll be scored on exploration and complexity of thought. So that's where that tutori comes in. You're really exploring this fully, trying to get different perspectives, all that stuff. Understanding of the purpose and audience. Your purpose is to argue cause and effect relationships. Your audience is academic. They may not agree with you. We want them to think your argument is researched and fair. Evidence of strong organization around that central thesis or claim. And that's where that feedback from me on your research journey project will help. Your ability to provide logical supporting evidence from your claim, for your claim from your sources. Okay, so remember that, logical supporting evidence. Mastery of the rules of incorporating evidence, and we'll work on some of this next week, do some workshopping on quote sandwiches, how to incorporate quotes, etc. But we're looking at the rules of quoting, summarizing and paraphrasing, embedding quotes appropriately using signal phrases. That's just things like according to this author or whatever. And citing appropriately using MLA format, okay? Writing process becomes important, especially to your writing process grade. Y'all will not be having a lot of homework in the next couple weeks. Your homework will just be your paper. So your homework or your writing process grade will really be, did you post whatever I'd asked you to post for that day so that we could workshop it in class, okay? Where do you post stuff? We are going to keep everything in your folder in our peer review folder, okay? Because the tutorial is for this project, your intro, all that stuff, we're just going to keep it in that same folder.
So the same folder we put our tutorial in.
That's right. On there in our peer, and there's a link. The link will be in the calendar, but you'll go to your class, your name folder, and that's where you're going to post your intro, your kind of first draft, and then your final. I say not final draft, but we're going to go through 3 peer review processes in the next 2 weeks. And all of that, all of those rough drafts will go in your folder. Okay. All right. Any questions at this point about the paper?
I just had a quick question about our working it's how we introduce the rest of the argument. So our working claim is going to be like at the end of our introduction.
It will be. Yep. Yeah, your claim will come at the end of your intro, just like a normal paper would. Now, sometimes students will set up in an argument paper, their claim will almost be like their research question. Then they explore the paper in the body, and then the conclusions where they assert the claim. You are welcome to do that too. So that I'm not saying it like it has to be there at the end of that first paragraph, but that's generally the placement of a thesis statement.
And then, I'm sorry, I just had
No,
another question.
go ahead.
So you were saying how like we could possibly include like a personal story in this essay. So like if I would have like a little anecdote in the beginning of my argument,
That would be fantastic.
I personally do have something to say about my argument of, kids spend too much time on like screens and stuff. I kind of have a little experience with like my younger brother. He's always on this stuff, technology. So I just thought, I don't know.
I know my child is too, and I swore she was not going to be. Like I was like, oh, when I'm a parent, I'm not gonna, and now here we are. Yes, so that's your hook, basically. That's pulling us into your argument. And then what you can do is re-reference your brother and that anecdote in your conclusion alongside some of these potential solutions that you found. Like, so what could be some of your parents' interventions, for instance, right? So yes, feel free in your intro to be what we call more persuasive and anecdotal as a way to, and you could do both. You could share your brother's story, and then you could share like a statistic. According to Pew Research, this amount of kids are on screens, over 2 hours a day. So you could blend both in your introduction. Okay. Those are great questions. Any other questions? All right, let me check our time real quick. Okay, we got 10 minutes, we're good. Y'all, let's look real quick at this student sample. Okay, so this is not the one from Alex Celsier. This is a student from my class in 2018, okay? I always thought this was such a compelling paper. This student was in the National Guard. She was very interested in military issues. And as a female, she was also very interested in looking at sort of the disproportionate rates of how sexual harassment affects female military officials, okay? So I think this is an interesting and a strong paper in a number of ways. It's also not perfect. It's a student paper, right? And even nothing's perfect the first time or first few times around. But I've always thought it was strong, and I like the title of it. Let's look at her intro real quick, and we're gonna consider, let's see what my questions were. All right, yeah, let's just consider, what causal relationship is explored here, okay? And we probably don't have time to look at the whole paper, but let's just look at the intro for now, because that's the one y'all will be working on over the weekend. So she says, just 3 years ago, women were permitted to assume combat roles across the U.S. military. Despite this step forward in development for women to stand alongside their male counterparts on the front lines, a problematic gender bias still exists. The cause of this uneven plane is the unfortunate residue of centuries of discrimination that women have been subjected to throughout history. Much of this discrimination has been left in the history books, but aspects of it still surface today, both obvious harassment and assault and subtle ways, discrimination or bias. The lingering effects of these biases is problematic. It causes unneeded stress and ultimately can create a critical and vulnerable weakness in our nation's armed forces. Okay, so this is her intro. What do you think could be strengthened here? This is a decent intro. She's putting us in the kairos, right? 3 years ago, women were permitted to assume combat roles. But I think that there's a lot to be said for strengthening this intro. What might you want to know, here at the start?
Should we maybe add more statistics regarding gender bias?
I think so. I need some kind of examples here, Now, I know often our examples are left to the body because that's where you're really building your evidence. But sometimes just having something, like if y'all notice the first body paragraph, says in a survey conducted by Pew Research before one of the waves of sexual misconduct allegations in 2017, found that women are twice as likely to be sexually assaulted than men. Okay. For military women, on the other hand, at least 25% of women serving in the military have been sexually assaulted, and up to 80% have been harassed. So, proving that problem in the introduction, I think would be a really compelling way, as opposed to, this is very general, saying like the cause of this uneven plane is residue of centuries of discrimination that women have been subjected to throughout history. Okay, well, I think that makes sense, right? Women have been disproportionately victims of sexual assault or harassment, but I would love to see some concrete, something it jars the reader into wanting to read on here. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And like I said, this was a strong paper. This paper probably got an A. I don't remember. But the rest of the paper is so much more compelling as compared to the intro, which is just kind of like, this is a problem. I also, if I could tell her to expand something, I would expand this sentence that I've highlighted here, because she talks at, there are obvious ways like harassment and assault, and there are subtle ways, right? So I want to know more about that too. Especially here when we look at that staggering statistic, 80% have been harassed. And that's a huge number. And that would be what we would consider probably more subtle ways, even though she has harassment here. But anyway, I want to break that down. Like, I just want to know more about that. Now, as far as her claim, is her claim causal? Says the lingering effects of these biases is problematic. It causes unneeded stress and can create a critical and vulnerable weakness in our armed forces. The answer is absolutely yes. Okay, this is a causal claim. She's saying this is the problem, okay? And we have to fix it because it is causing these other problems. Obviously, it's a problem to the victim. It causes the victim stress, but also it can actually hurt our armed forces. It can make people not trust each other. It can make our armed forces more vulnerable, etc. Okay, so this is interesting and also shows us, the idea is we know that victims of assault or harassment, they are affected directly. Who is affected indirectly? The military as a whole, right? So that's where that directly and indirectly question could help you guys if you're trying to kind of push past just this one. So I'm gonna come back to mental health and college students. We know the students themselves are victims of, these societal things that are happening that are causing all this stress, but who is affected indirectly? Okay. All right, we're gonna come out of here. What I want y'all to do as you're just thinking about drafting, maybe you have more time this weekend. I don't know if y'all are going home. I know some people are having Easter celebrations and things, but if you want to start drafting, draft. There's no reason not to. And you can use some of these student samples, both the Alex Celsior one that's on the assignment sheet and then this one from my student a few years ago. You can look at how she's embedding her evidence, how is she concluding, how is she referencing counterclaims. Just use those samples to help you as you consider your own. Now we are out of time, but what I was gonna do is, oh gosh, I've given you a bunch of stuff for intros. I forgot about this. There's lots here, so come back to this slide, you know, especially if you just want some extra help. But this is a journal article on college students and stress, particularly in the time of COVID-19. So for some of you, I know a lot of people are doing mental health papers. This actually could be a source you might want to use, and you're welcome to it. But I was going to talk to y'all about using journal articles and not being intimidated by the methodology that you see when you're going through these. A lot of what you can get from a journal article can come from the abstract and then from reading the conclusions. Okay, so skipping past the stuff that scares you or the terminology that you're like, I don't even know what that means, that's fine. Those are research terms and they're specific to those scientists in the field. You don't have to know all of them. What you want to know is down here in the, sometimes it's called discussion, sometimes it's called conclusion, but it's essentially, we did this research and this is what we found. Okay, so I encourage you to push yourself into those academic sources and try not to be intimidated by them. The other thing we were going to do today is look at a couple of different causal arguments, student sample, and then two other ones that we've read, the ones on Asian American attacks, and then the other one on racism and health. You can look at those intros too to kind of gain some helpful tips. All right, homework. Finish your Sutori, try to post it by the end of the day on Thursday, misspelled that. And go ahead and begin working on your causal argument paper, your intro, post your intro to our peer review folder on by the time we have class on Monday. Friday's nothing, it's a school holiday, so enjoy that. There's a weekend homework slide that basically says everything I've already told you, and here's that link again to the peer review folder. Okay. Y'all just email me if you have any questions. I'm sorry I kept everybody a little late, especially if you have questions about the Sutori, because that is due tomorrow night. All right, y'all have a good day. Bye, Jake and Avery.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ooh, sound like there was a...
Yeah, the fire alarm in Stockard went off like 2 minutes ago.
Like...
Bless
you, you had
class. It
class.
happens every time.
Oh, Lord, I'm sorry. Sounds like things haven't changed. I remember.
Yeah.
All right, see you later.
Thank you.
Poor thing.